In the heart of bustling Los Angeles, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and dreams seemed just within reach, there lived a man named Jorge Ramirez. Jorge wasn't famous, nor did he aspire to be. He was an ordinary man with extraordinary determination, working as a cleaner in one of the city's most prestigious office buildings. Every morning before sunrise, Jorge would rise from his small apartment, kiss his two young children goodbye, and head off to work. His job might not have been glamorous, but it gave him purpose, a way to provide for his family and instill values of hard work in his kids. Jorge had a quiet charm that made people notice him, even if they didn't realize it at first. He greeted everyone with a warm smile, whether it was the CEO stepping out of the elevator or the intern rushing late to their desk. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," he'd say cheerfully as the executive passed by, coffee in hand. Or, "Have a great day, miss," to the receptionist who often looked overwhelmed by phone calls and emails. People appreciated his kindness even if they rarely stopped to chat. In a world filled with deadlines and stress, Jorge brought a sense of calm simply by being himself. Despite his tireless efforts, life wasn't easy for Jorge. As a single father, he carried the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. His paycheck barely covered rent, groceries, and school supplies for his kids, but he never complained. Instead, he found joy in the little things, the laughter of his children, the satisfaction of seeing a freshly cleaned hallway gleaming under the fluorescent lights, or the occasional kind word from someone passing through the lobby. Jorge believed that happiness came not from what you had, but how you treated others and faced challenges with grace. One Friday afternoon, something unusual happened that would change Jorge's life forever. The office buzzed with excitement because none other than Keanu Reeves, the beloved Hollywood actor, was scheduled to visit. Known for his roles in action-packed blockbusters and heartfelt dramas alike, Keanu was admired not only for his talent, but also for his down-to-earth personality. Rumor had it that he was meeting with top executives about a potential partnership, though no one knew the exact details. All anyone cared about was the chance to catch a glimpse of the star. As Jorge went about his usual duties that day, he couldn't help but feel a flutter of anticipation. Like many others, he had grown up watching Keanu's movies. From thrilling adventures to poignant stories of love and loss, Keanu's performances resonated deeply with audiences around the world. But more than his acting, it was Keanu's reputation as a genuinely good person that inspired Jorge. Stories of Keanu helping strangers, supporting charitable causes, and remaining humble despite his fame were well known. For Jorge, these qualities made Keanu more than just a celebrity. He was someone worth looking up to. When Jorge finished cleaning the conference room where Keanu was holding his meeting, he hesitated for a moment outside the door. Through the glass panel, he could see the actor seated at the table, deep in conversation with the executives. Jorge shook his head, chuckling softly at himself. What was he thinking? Approaching someone like Keanu felt impossible. Yet, as he pushed his cart down the hallway, he couldn't shake the thought. His kids adored Keanu too, and wouldn't it be amazing to surprise them with an autograph? It was a simple request, after all, just a signature on a scrap of paper. Surely Keanu wouldn't mind. Little did Jorge know this decision would set off a chain of events that would test his resilience, reveal the true nature of those around him, and ultimately lead to an unexpected act of kindness that would leave everyone stunned. But for now, all Jorge could think about was finding the courage to approach the man whose movies had brought so much joy to his family, and hoping against hope that he wouldn't regret it later. After finishing his tasks in the conference room, Jorge stood by the doorway, clutching a small piece of paper he had torn from his notepad. His heart raced as he watched Keanu Reeves through the glass panel. The actor was seated at the head of the table, leaning slightly forward as he listened intently to the executives around him. Jorge hesitated again, his palms sweaty and his mind clouded with doubt. Was this really a good idea? What if Keanu refused? Worse yet, what if someone saw him and thought he was being unprofessional? But then, something inside Jorge pushed him forward. He reminded himself why he wanted to do this, not for himself, but for his kids. They loved Keanu's movies, especially The Matrix and John Wick. Every time they watched one together, they would mimic the stunts and laugh until their sides hurt. An autograph from Keanu would mean the world to them. It wasn't just a signature, it was a memory, a story they could tell their friends. Taking a deep breath, Jorge stepped into the hallway and waited patiently near the exit of the conference room. When the meeting finally ended, the executives filed out, chatting animatedly about the discussion. Jorge felt a lump form in his throat as Keanu emerged last, adjusting the collar of his leather jacket. For a moment, Jorge froze, unsure how to approach someone so famous. But before he could overthink it, Keanu glanced up and noticed him standing there. Their eyes met briefly, and Jorge managed a nervous smile. "Excuse me, Mr. Reeves," Jorge said softly, stepping closer. "I'm sorry to bother you." Keanu turned toward him, his expression warm and curious. "No problem," he replied, his voice calm and friendly. "What can I do for you?" Jorge fumbled with the scrap of paper in his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. I know you're busy, sir, but my kids are huge fans of yours. They love your movies, and I was wondering, could you sign this for them, just a quick autograph?" To Jorge's relief, Keanu didn't hesitate. Instead, he smiled warmly and reached for the pen tucked into his pocket. "Of course," he said, taking the paper. "What are their names?" "Carlos and Sofia," Jorge replied quickly, still feeling a mix of nerves and awe. "Thank you so much, Mr. Reeves. This means a lot to them, and to me." As Keanu scribbled his signature, on the paper he asked casually, "How old are they?" "Carlos is 8 and Sofia is 6, Jorge answered, his voice steadying now that the initial awkwardness had passed. "They watch your movies all the time. Well, when I let them," he added with a chuckle. Keanu handed the signed paper back to Jorge, adding a little doodle of a happy face next to his name. "Tell them I said hi," he said with a grin. Then, surprising Jorge even further, he asked, "And how about you? Do you enjoy cleaning offices, or is there something else you'd rather be doing?" The question caught Jorge off guard. No one, especially not someone like Keanu Reeves, had ever asked him about his dreams before. I like what I do," Jorge stammered. "It's honest work, and it helps me take care of my family. But yeah, someday I'd love to start my own business, maybe landscaping. I've always enjoyed working outdoors." Keanu nodded thoughtfully, his gaze steady and kind. "That sounds great. You should go for it. Life's too short not to chase what makes you happy." For those few moments, Jorge forgot where he was. He forgot that he was just a cleaner talking to one of Hollywood's biggest stars. All he felt was gratitude for Keanu's generosity, for the encouragement, and for the reminder that his dreams mattered, no matter how big or small they seemed. Unbeknownst to Jorge, however, their brief exchange hadn't gone unnoticed. Sarah, the stern head of human resources, had been walking down the hallway when she spotted Jorge speaking with Keanu. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she observed the scene unfold. In her eyes, Jorge was violating company policy by engaging with a guest during work hours, even though his shift had technically ended. To her, professionalism meant maintaining boundaries at all times, regardless of circumstances. She didn't hear their conversation or see the genuine warmth between them. All she saw was a cleaner asking for an autograph, which she deemed inappropriate. Later that evening, as Jorge tucked the signed paper safely into his bag and headed home, he couldn't stop smiling. He imagined the look on Carlos and Sofia's faces when he showed them the autograph. He replayed Keanu's words in his mind, feeling a renewed sense of hope about pursuing his dream of starting a landscaping business. Little did he know, Sarah had already made up her mind about what happened earlier that day, and tomorrow everything would change, for better or worse. The next morning, Jorge arrived at the office building as he always did, early with a positive attitude and ready to tackle the day's work. He hummed softly to himself as he pushed his cleaning cart down the hallway, thinking about how excited Carlos and Sofia would be when they saw Keanu Reeves' autograph. It wasn't every day that someone like Keanu took the time to chat and encourage a stranger, let alone a cleaner in an office building. Jorge felt a sense of pride, not just because he'd met a celebrity, but because he had done something special for his kids. But as Jorge stepped into the lobby, something felt off. The usual buzz of activity seemed quieter than normal, almost tense. A few coworkers glanced his way, their expressions unreadable. One of them, Maria, who worked at the front desk, gave him a sympathetic look before quickly turning away. Jorge frowned, brushing it off as nothing more than his imagination. Maybe everyone was just stressed about deadlines or some new company policy. He shrugged it off and headed toward the supply closet to grab fresh cleaning supplies. It wasn't long before Sarah, the head of human resources, appeared in the hallway. Her sharp heels clicked against the tiled floor as she approached Jorge with a stern expression on her face. "Jorge," she said curtly, gesturing for him to follow her. "Come with me to my office." Confused but obedient, Jorge followed. Sarah? His heart beginning to race. Had he forgotten to clock in? Left a mess somewhere by accident? His mind raced through possibilities, none of which prepared him for what came next. Once inside her office, Sarah closed the door behind them, her demeanor cold and unyielding. "Take a seat," she instructed, pointing to the chair across from her desk. Jorge sat down nervously, clutching the handle of his mop like a lifeline. Sarah wasted no time getting straight to the point. "I received reports yesterday that you were seen speaking with Mr. Keanu Reeves during work hours," she began, her tone clipped and formal. "Specifically, asking him for an autograph. Is this true?" Jorge blinked, taken aback. "Yes, ma'am, it is," he admitted honestly. "But I promise it was after my shift ended. I wasn't neglecting my duties or anything, well, my kids are huge fans of his and I thought it would mean a lot to them if I could get his autograph." Sarah didn't soften. If anything, her expression grew even colder. "Regardless of your intentions, Jorge, this kind of behavior is unacceptable. Our employees are expected to maintain professionalism at all times. Engaging with guests in such a manner reflects poorly on the company." "But I wasn't on duty," Jorge protested, his voice rising slightly despite his best efforts to stay calm. "I finished cleaning the conference room and the meeting was over. I wasn't interrupting anything." "That doesn't matter," Sarah shot back, her voice hardening. "You represent this company whether you're clocked in or not. Asking for autographs makes us look unprofessional. We can't have staff behaving this way." Jorge stared at her, stunned. This couldn't be happening. He had worked here for years without a single complaint. He showed up early, stayed late when needed, and always gave his best effort. How could one small moment, an innocent request for an autograph, be enough to justify firing him? "I don't understand," Jorge said quietly, his throat tight, with emotion. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was polite, respectful, and it only took a minute. Why does this have to end like this?" Sarah sighed, leaning back in her chair. For a brief second, she almost looked regretful, but then her mask of authority slipped back into place. "It's not personal, Jorge. It's about setting an example. If we allow exceptions, others might think it's okay to bend the rules, too. I'm sorry, but I have no choice." With those final words, Sarah handed Jorge a termination letter. The document was short and impersonal, detailing the reasons for his dismissal and instructions for returning his uniform and ID badge. Jorge read it twice, hoping it was some kind of mistake, but the reality sank in quickly. His hands trembled as he folded the paper and stuffed it into his pocket. As he left Sarah's office, the weight of what had just happened hit him like a ton of bricks. He walked slowly back to the locker room where he changed out of his uniform, for the last time. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the ground beneath him was crumbling. How was he going to tell Carlos and Sofia? What would they eat tomorrow? Where would he find another job that paid enough to cover rent? Word spread fast among the staff. By lunchtime, nearly everyone knew what had happened. Some expressed outrage, whispering angrily about how unfair it was. Others kept quiet, afraid to speak up for fear of drawing attention to themselves. Maria stopped Jorge on his way out, tears in her eyes. "This is ridiculous," she whispered fiercely. "You didn't deserve this. Everyone knows how hard you work." Jorge forced a weak smile, though his chest ached with shame and frustration. "Thanks, Maria," he said softly. "But there's nothing I can do now. I'll figure something out." When Jorge finally stepped outside the building, the bright Los Angeles sun felt harsh and unforgiving. He squinted against the glare, blinking back tears as he climbed into his old car. Sitting there for a moment, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. The job he had poured so much of himself into, the job that had kept food on the table and clothes on his children's backs, was gone. All because he had dared to ask for an autograph. For the first time in years, Jorge felt truly defeated. But deep down, buried beneath the anger and disappointment, a flicker of hope remained. Keanu's words echoed in his mind. Life's too short not to chase what makes you happy. Maybe, just maybe, this setback could lead to something better. As he started the engine and drove home, Jorge resolved to keep fighting, for his family, for his dreams, and for the belief that good people shouldn't be punished for doing something kind. The days following his termination were some of the hardest Jorge had ever faced. He spent hours scrolling through job listings online, applying to any position he thought might fit his skill set. But every rejection email or unanswered application felt like another blow to his confidence. The bills were piling up, and the weight of providing for Carlos and Sofia grew heavier with each passing day. Despite his best efforts to stay positive, Jorge couldn't shake the feeling that life had dealt him an unfair hand. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Jorge, whispers about his firing had reached Keanu Reeves's team. A sympathetic employee from the ID's office, Maria, who had been so upset by the situation, had discreetly sent an email to Keanu's management explaining what had happened. She included details about Jorge's dedication to his work, his kindness toward others, and how unjustly he had been treated. At first, Keanu's assistant flagged the message as spam, assuming it was just another fan trying to get attention. But when Keanu himself stumbled across the email while reviewing correspondence, he stopped in his tracks. Keanu read Maria's words carefully, his brow furrowing with concern. He remembered Jorge vividly, the cleaner who had approached him with such genuine gratitude and warmth. Their brief interaction had left a lasting impression on Keanu, not because of its significance, but because of Jorge's humility and sincerity. To think that Jorge had lost his job over something so small infuriated him. Without hesitation, Keanu picked up the phone and dialed the main line for the office building where he'd attended the meeting. After navigating through several layers of receptionists and assistants, he finally got connected to Sarah, the head of human resources. When she realized who was on the other end of the line, her tone shifted immediately from professional to flustered. Mr. Reeves. What an honor, Sarah gushed, clearly unprepared for this call. How can I assist you? Keanu cut straight to the point. I understand one of your employees, a man named Jorge Ramirez, was fired recently because he asked me for an autograph. Is that correct? Sarah hesitated, caught off guard by the question. Well, yes, Mr. Reeves, that is accurate. However, we have strict policies regarding professionalism and… Keanu interrupted her, his voice calm but firm. With all due respect, Sarah, asking for an autograph isn't unprofessional. It's human. Jorge wasn't interrupting anything. He waited until after the meeting ended and was incredibly polite. From what I saw, he's exactly the kind of person you want representing your company. Sarah stammered, clearly uncomfortable. We appreciate your perspective, Mr. Reeves, but these decisions are made based on company policy. We must enforce consistency across the board. Keanu sighed, his frustration evident. Consistency is important, but so is fairness. Firing someone for a harmless gesture doesn't send the right message to your employees, or to the public. Reconsider this decision, Sarah. You won't regret it. Despite Keanu's impassioned plea, Sarah remained unmoved. She thanked him for his input but reiterated that the decision stood. When Keanu hung up the phone, he leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. He knew he couldn't force the company to reinstate Jorge, but he also knew he couldn't let this injustice go unanswered. There had to be another way to help. Later that evening, Keanu called together his team to brainstorm ideas. They discussed various options, from issuing a public statement condemning the company's actions to reaching out directly to Jorge. In the end, They decided on a plan that would not only support Jorge financially, but also shine a spotlight on the importance of treating workers with dignity and respect. Keanu arranged a surprise visit to the office building, inviting local media outlets to cover the event. Word spread quickly among the staff, and by the time Keanu arrived the next morning, the lobby was packed with curious employees and reporters. Cameras flashed as Keanu stepped inside, his presence commanding attention without needing to say a word. Sarah appeared moments later, looking pale and visibly nervous as she tried to greet him. Keanu ignored her and instead turned to address the crowd. Standing in front of the gathered employees, he spoke with quiet authority. "I came here today to talk about something that matters deeply to me: fairness. A few days ago, I learned that one of your colleagues, Jorge Ramirez, was fired for simply asking me for an autograph. Now, I don't know about you, but I believe that taking a moment to connect with someone shouldn't cost them their livelihood." The room fell silent as Keanu continued. "Jorge is a hardworking man who has dedicated years of service to this company. He's kind, respectful, and goes above and beyond to make sure his job is done well. Yet, despite all of that, he was let go for doing something that most people would consider completely harmless. That's not right." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the part of his speech that would leave everyone stunned. "Since this company refuses to do the right thing, I've decided to step in personally. I will cover Jorge's lost wages until he finds new employment. Additionally, I'll provide financial support to help him pursue his dream of starting a landscaping business. Jorge deserves better than what he received, and I hope this sends a clear message. No one should be punished for being human." Gasps rippled through the crowd as cameras captured the reactions of the employees. Some clapped enthusiastically, while others wiped away tears. Sarah stood frozen near the back, her face flushed with embarrassment. For the first time, she seemed to realize the magnitude of her decision and the backlash it had sparked. When Keanu finished speaking, he shook hands with a few employees before leaving the building. As he walked out, surrounded by reporters shouting questions, he felt a sense of satisfaction. He hadn't been able to change the company's mind, but he had done something far more meaningful. He had given Jorge a second chance. Back at home, Jorge had no idea what was happening. He was sitting at the kitchen table going over his finances yet again, when his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert about Keanu's visit to the office and his announcement. Jorge read the article twice, his heart pounding with disbelief. Had Keanu really done this for him? Was it possible that someone like Keanu cared enough to fight for someone like him? Tears streamed down Jorge's face as he realized the truth. This wasn't just about getting fired anymore. It was about being seen, valued, and supported in ways he never could have imagined. And for the first time since losing his job, Jorge allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were going to turn out okay after all. The days following Keanu's dramatic intervention were nothing short of surreal for Jorge. When the news broke about Keanu's announcement, it spread like wildfire, not just within the office building but across social media platforms and local news outlets. People everywhere were captivated by the story of a humble cleaner who had been fired for asking for an autograph, and how one of Hollywood's most beloved stars had stepped in to make things right. For Jorge, however, the whirlwind of attention was overwhelming. At first, Jorge avoided watching the news or reading articles about himself. He felt embarrassed, as though he didn't deserve all the fuss. "I'm just a regular guy," he told Maria when she called to check on him. "Why is everyone making such a big deal out of this?" But Maria insisted that the world needed more stories like his, stories about kindness, resilience, and standing up for what was right. Slowly, Jorge began to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about shining a light on fairness and reminding people that even the smallest acts of compassion could have ripple effects far beyond what anyone might expect. Keanu's team wasted no time putting their promises into action. Within days, Jorge received a phone call from one of Keanu's representatives explaining the details of the financial support they were offering. Not only would Keanu cover Jorge's lost wages until he found stable employment, but he would also provide seed funding to help Jorge launch his dream business. a landscaping venture. The representative assured Jorge that there were no strings attached. It was simply Keanu's way of ensuring Jorge could rebuild his life without fear of financial instability. Jorge was speechless. He had spent years dreaming of starting his own business, imagining a future where he could work outdoors, create beautiful spaces, and spend more time with his kids. But those dreams had always felt out of reach, weighed down by bills and responsibilities. Now, thanks to Keanu's generosity, those dreams suddenly seemed possible. As Jorge hung up the phone, tears streaming down his face, he whispered a quiet thank you, not just to Keanu but to the universe for bringing someone so kind into his life at exactly the right moment. Word of Keanu's gesture quickly reached the community, sparking an outpouring of support for Jorge. Local businesses offered discounts on tools and equipment, while neighbors volunteered to help with marketing and design ideas. Carlos and Sofia, thrilled to learn that their favorite actor had helped their dad, proudly told everyone at school about the time Keanu saved our family. Even strangers started reaching out, sharing messages of encouragement and admiration for Jorge's perseverance. For the first time in weeks, Jorge felt a renewed sense of hope and purpose. Meanwhile, back at the office, the fallout from Keanu's visit continued to reverberate. Employees couldn't stop talking about what had happened, debating whether the company's decision to fire Jorge had been justified. Many felt vindicated by Keanu's words, agreeing that firing someone over such a minor act was unnecessarily harsh. Others criticized Sarah and the executives for their lack of empathy, pointing out that Jorge's dismissal had tarnished the company's reputation. Sarah, once known for her strict adherence to rules, now found herself under intense scrutiny. Her colleagues questioned her judgment, and some even suggested she should resign. Though she tried to defend her actions, claiming she was only following protocol, it became clear that her rigid approach had alienated both staff and the public. In an attempt to salvage the situation, the company issued a vague apology stating that they were reviewing internal policies to ensure fairness moving forward. But few believed it was anything more than damage control. For Jorge, the most meaningful part of the entire ordeal was the opportunity to reconnect with Keanu. A few weeks after the announcement, Keanu invited Jorge and his family to meet him for lunch. At first, Jorge hesitated, unsure if accepting the invitation would seem presumptuous. But Keanu insisted, saying he wanted to hear how things were going and offer any additional advice. So, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Jorge, Carlos, and Sofia arrived at a cozy cafe downtown, where Keanu greeted them warmly. Over burgers and milkshakes, Keanu listened intently as Jorge shared updates about his plans for the landscaping business. He asked thoughtful questions, offered practical tips, and encouraged Jorge to think big. "You've got this," Keanu said with a grin. "And remember, success isn't just about money. It's about doing something you love and making a difference along the way." Carlos and Sofia beamed throughout the meal, occasionally chiming in to tell Keanu how much they loved his movies. When dessert arrived, a towering slice of chocolate cake, Keanu playfully challenged the kids to a race to see who could eat theirs fastest. Laughter filled the room as forks clinked against plates, and for a few hours, Jorge forgot about everything, except the joy of being present with his family and this extraordinary man who had changed their lives. As the afternoon drew to a close, Keanu handed Jorge a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note that read, "To Jorge and family, never stop chasing your dreams. You inspire me every day." Beneath the note was a check for an amount that left Jorge momentarily speechless. It was more than enough to cover startup costs for his business, with plenty left over for savings. Driving home that evening, Jorge reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. Just weeks ago, he had felt defeated, convinced that life had dealt him an impossible hand. Now he was surrounded by opportunities he had only dreamed of, and a newfound belief that kindness truly did matter. As he glanced in the rearview mirror at Carlos and Sofia, giggling and replaying highlights from their lunch with Keanu, Jorge realized something profound. Sometimes, the darkest moments lead to the brightest beginnings. This chapter sets the stage for Jorge's transformation and the impact of Keanu's actions on both his personal journey and the broader community. Would you like to proceed to part 6? Months passed, and Jorge's life transformed in ways he never could have imagined. With Keanu's support, he threw himself into building his landscaping business with the same determination and care that had defined his years as a cleaner. He spent countless hours researching best practices, networking with local gardeners, and sketching out designs for yards that would bring beauty and tranquility to his clients' homes. Carlos and Sofia often joined him on weekends, helping plant flowers, rake leaves, or water freshly laid sod. For Jorge, these moments were priceless, not just because they helped lighten his workload, but because they allowed him to share his passion with his children. Jorge named his business Green Roots Landscaping, inspired by the idea of growth and stability. His first few projects came from friends and neighbors who wanted to support his new venture, but word quickly spread about the quality of his work. Clients praised not only his attention to detail but also his friendly demeanor and willingness to go above and beyond. Whether it was staying late to finish a project or offering advice on how to care for plants, Jorge approached every job with pride and professionalism. Before long, Green Roots became a staple in the community, earning glowing reviews and repeat customers. One day, while working on a particularly challenging backyard renovation, Jorge received an unexpected call from a local news station. They had caught wind of his story and wanted to feature him in a segment about small businesses thriving against the odds. At first, Jorge hesitated. He still wasn't entirely comfortable being in the spotlight, but Maria convinced him to say yes. "This is your chance to inspire others," she told him. "People need to hear that hard work and kindness can lead to great things." The interview aired on a Sunday evening, and within hours, Jorge's phone began ringing nonstop. Strangers called to congratulate him, while others reached out to inquire about his services. By the end of the week, Jorge's schedule was fully booked for months ahead. What started as a modest dream had blossomed into a flourishing business, thanks in large part to the goodwill generated by his story and Keanu's initial act of generosity. But Jorge didn't let success change him. If anything, it deepened his commitment to giving back. He hired several part-time workers from the neighborhood, prioritizing those who struggled to find stable employment. He also partnered with a local nonprofit to beautify public spaces, donating his time and resources to transform vacant lots into vibrant gardens. Watching these neglected areas come alive with color and greenery filled Jorge with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced before. It wasn't just about creating something beautiful, it was about making a difference in the lives of others. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of Keanu's intervention continued to reverberate far beyond Jorge's world. The office where Jorge had worked underwent significant changes in response to the backlash over his firing. Employees formed a committee to review company policies, advocating for reforms that prioritized empathy and fairness. Sarah, once feared for her strictness, stepped down from her role as head of HR, citing personal reasons. Her departure marked a turning point for the organization, which began implementing programs to recognize and reward employees for their dedication and humanity. Keanu, too, remained touched by Jorge's journey. Though their paths crossed less frequently now, he kept tabs on Jorge's progress through occasional updates from his team. When Green Roots Landscaping celebrated its one-year anniversary, Keanu sent a heartfelt message congratulating Jorge on his success. "You've proven that resilience and kindness are unstoppable forces," Keanu wrote. "Keep inspiring us all." Touched by the note, Jorge framed it and hung it in his office, a constant reminder of the impact one person's compassion could have. As the years went by, Jorge's kids grew older, and so did his business. Carlos developed a knack for designing landscapes, often sketching elaborate plans that Jorge brought to life. Sofia, meanwhile, inherited her father's love for nurturing plants and became the unofficial plant whisperer of the family. Together, they turned Green Roots into a legacy, a testament to what could be achieved when people believed in each other and refused to give up. On the 5th anniversary of his firing, Jorge stood in the middle of a lush garden he had designed for a client, taking a moment to reflect on how far he'd come. The sun warmed his face as he thought about the twists and turns that had led him here. From losing his job to meeting Keanu, from struggling to make ends meet to running a thriving business. Life had taught him that setbacks weren't the end. They were opportunities to grow stronger, wiser, and more determined. That evening, sitting around the dinner table with Carlos and Sofia, Jorge shared a piece of wisdom he hoped they would carry with them always. No matter what happens in life, he said, never forget the power of kindness. Sometimes a single act of goodness can change everything. For you, for someone else, and maybe even for the whole world. Carlos and Sofia nodded, their eyes shining with admiration for their dad. They knew how much he had overcome and how grateful he was for the second chance he'd been given. As they cleared the dishes together, laughter filling the air, Jorge felt a deep sense of peace. He had faced adversity head-on, leaned on the support of those who cared about him, and emerged stronger than ever. And though he couldn't predict what the future held, he knew one thing for certain. As long as he stayed true to himself and continued to spread kindness wherever he went, life would always find a way to bloom, even after the darkest storms.